In the 1950s, mothers made 10-minute suppers that mattered. Their work in the kitchen didn't just feed families, they created complete hot meals just in 10 minutes. Clara's Poorman's meal and Hoover stew and milk toast. These 10-minute suppers might sound too simple today, but they kept families fed when money disappeared. Let's begin. Clara's Poorman's meal became the depression supper mothers made 3 times weekly because one skillet turned cheap ingredients into filling dinner for under 15 cents total. The dish combined potatoes, onions, and hot dogs into something families requested constantly. Mothers knew this simple meal kept bellies full for hours. Nobody complained when this appeared on the table again. Mothers sliced 3 large potatoes into thin rounds. They chopped 1 yellow onion into small pieces. They cut 2 hot dogs into bite-sized chunks. They heated 2 tablespoons of lard in a cast-iron skillet over medium heat. They fried potatoes and onions together for 8 minutes until golden. They added hot dog pieces and fried everything 2 more minutes. Salt and black pepper seasoned everything. The potatoes turned crispy on edges and soft inside. Onions became sweet and caramelized. Hot dogs added protein and salty flavor. Families ate this straight from the skillet. The secret was using yesterday's cold-boiled potatoes that fried faster and crisped better than raw potatoes. Hoover stew became the most famous Depression one-pot meal because families named it after President Hoover during the economic crash. Our mothers cooked this when cupboards held almost nothing but pasta and canned goods. The dish fed 6 people for under 30 cents total. Every family across America knew this recipe by heart during hard times. Mothers boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni in salted water for 7 minutes. They drained the pasta and returned it to the pot. They added 1 can of diced tomatoes with juice. They sliced 4 hot dogs into rounds and stirred them into the pot. They heated everything together over medium heat for 3 minutes. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar seasoned the stew. The macaroni absorbed tomato juice and turned soft. Hot dogs added substance and salt. The sugar balanced tomato tartness. Families ate this with buttered bread on the side. The secret was adding sugar that cut the acid and made children ask for seconds every single time. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Milk toast became the gentle supper. Mothers served sick children and elderly grandparents because warm milk and soft bread soothed upset stomachs better than anything else. The dish appeared on breakfast and supper tables throughout the Depression. Mothers made this in 5 minutes flat when nothing else would do. 3 ingredients every household owned created this comforting meal. Mothers toasted 2 slices of white bread until golden brown. They placed toast in a shallow bowl. They heated 1 cup of whole milk in a small saucepan until it steamed but did not boil. They poured hot milk over toast. They dotted the top with 1 tablespoon of butter. They sprinkled 1 tablespoon of white sugar over everything. They let it sit 30 seconds for toast to soften. The toast absorbed warm milk like a sponge. Butter melted into creamy pools. Sugar added gentle sweetness. Families ate this with spoons while sitting up in bed. The secret was using day-old bread that soaked up milk better and held its shape perfectly. Before we move on, egg gravy became the Southern poor man's breakfast and supper favorite because mothers made this when meat ran out, but eggs remained in the icebox. The dish combined simple ingredients into rich, creamy comfort that filled hungry bellies for hours. This gravy cost less than 10 cents and fed 4 people easily. Every Southern family ate this at least twice weekly during lean months. Mothers melted 2 tablespoons of butter in a cast-iron skillet over medium heat. They whisked in 2 tablespoons of flour and cooked it 1 minute. They slowly poured in 1 cup of whole milk while whisking to prevent lumps. They cracked 2 eggs directly into the gravy and stirred gently to break yolks. They cooked everything 2 more minutes until eggs set in ribbons. Salt and black pepper seasoned it. They split 4 biscuits in half and placed them in bowls. They ladled hot egg gravy over biscuit pieces. The gravy tasted rich and creamy. Eggs created soft, tender ribbons throughout. Biscuits soaked up every drop of sauce. The secret was using real butter that made cheap ingredients taste expensive. Fried cornmeal mush became the money-saving supper mothers served when flour supplies ran low because cornmeal cost half the price of wheat flour. Families made big batches of cornmeal mush and fried slices for breakfast and supper throughout the week. This forgotten dish tasted better than pancakes to depression children. Every family kept a loaf of cold mush ready in the icebox for quick frying. Mothers boiled 3 cups of water in a saucepan. They whisked in 1 cup of yellow cornmeal slowly to prevent lumps. They cooked mush 10 minutes while stirring constantly until very thick. They poured hot mush into a greased loaf pan and let it cool until firm. They sliced cold mush into half-inch slices. They heated 2 tablespoons of butter in a skillet over medium-high heat. They fried mush slices 3 minutes per side until golden and crispy. They drizzled warm maple syrup or molasses over hot fried slices. The mush tasted crispy outside and creamy inside. Syrup soaked into every bite and created sweet satisfaction. The secret was chilling mush overnight that made it slice clean and fry perfectly crispy. 5 forgotten 10-minute suppers: Clara's Poorman's meal, Hoover's stew, milk toast, egg gravy, and fried cornmeal mush, each cost under 30 cents and fed 4 to 6 people. Every recipe used pantry staples and 1 skillet. Every dish cooked in 10 minutes or less. These suppers saved families during hardest times. Water pie filling became the most surprising Depression dessert supper because families ate sweet pie filling straight from pots when sugar ran too low for cake. The recipe used water instead of expensive fruit and still tasted like real lemon custard. Mothers made this in 7 minutes flat. This mock filling fooled everyone who tasted it into thinking real lemons were used. But mothers combined 1 cup of white sugar with 2 tablespoons of flour in a saucepan. They whisked in 1½ cups of cold water until smooth. They added 2 tablespoons of butter and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. They added 1 tablespoon of lemon extract if they had it. They cooked mixture over medium heat while stirring constantly for 5 minutes until it thickened like pudding. They poured it into bowls to cool slightly. They served it warm or cold as dessert supper. The filling tasted tangy and sweet like real lemon custard. Vinegar created sour lemon flavor perfectly. Butter made it rich and smooth. The secret was vinegar that mimicked lemon juice perfectly and cost 1 cent per batch. Mashed potato and powdered sugar. Potato candy became the Depression treat that shocked everyone because nobody believed mashed potatoes could transform into sweet candy. Mothers made this when children begged for treats and no money remained for store-bought sweets. The recipe used leftover mashed potatoes and turned them into something magical. Every batch cost less than 15 cents and satisfied sweet cravings completely. Mothers mashed 1 small cooked potato until completely smooth with no lumps remaining. They added 3 to 4 cups of powdered sugar gradually while mixing until it formed stiff dough. They rolled dough flat on a clean counter dusted with more powdered sugar. They spread thin layer of peanut butter over flattened dough. They rolled it up tightly like a jelly roll. They sliced it into half-inch rounds. They chilled slices 30 minutes before serving. The candy tasted sweet and creamy with no potato flavor whatsoever. Peanut butter added protein and richness. Children ate this for supper and dessert combined. The secret was adding enough powdered sugar that completely transformed potato into real candy nobody could identify. Mock apple pie became the most famous fake fruit dessert because Ritz Cracker Company printed this recipe on every box during the Depression. Mothers served it for Sunday supper when real apples cost too much at markets. The dish fooled everyone who tasted it into believing they ate real apple pie. Nobody suspected crackers created the filling until mothers revealed the secret ingredient. Mothers broke 30 Ritz crackers into large pieces into a bowl. They made syrup by boiling 2 cups of water with 1½ cups of sugar and 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar for 5 minutes. They poured hot syrup over crackers and let them soak 2 minutes. They poured everything into a pie crust. They dotted top with butter and sprinkled cinnamon over everything. They covered it with top crust. They baked it at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. The pie tasted exactly like real apple pie. Crackers softened and mimicked apple texture perfectly. Cinnamon and sugar created authentic apple flavor. The secret was cream of tartar that gave crackers distinctive apple tang. Sugar sandwich became every Depression child's favorite quick supper because mothers made this when absolutely nothing else remained in the house. The sandwich used 3 ingredients every family kept until the very last day before payday. This forgotten treat took 30 seconds to prepare from start to finish. Children ate this and felt like they received dessert for dinner instead of regular food. Mothers took 2 slices of soft white bread. They spread softened butter generously over one side of each slice. They sprinkled white granulated sugar heavily over buttered bread. They pressed 2 slices together butter side in to make sandwich. They cut it diagonally into triangles. Some mothers pressed edges with fork to seal them like pastry. Some mothers fried sandwich in hot skillet 1 minute per side to caramelize sugar. The sandwich tasted sweet and satisfying. Butter made it rich and creamy. Sugar added pure sweetness and slight crunch. Children ate this after school and before bed. The secret was using soft bread and room-temperature butter that combined perfectly and kept sugar from falling out. Peanut butter bread became the Depression supper mothers served when meat and vegetables ran out completely because peanut butter provided protein and fat to keep children growing strong. This simple meal cost less than 5 cents per person to make. Every family ate this at least twice weekly during hardest months. Nobody complained because peanut butter filled bellies and tasted good plain. Mothers took 2 slices of white bread per person. They spread smooth peanut butter thickly on one side of each slice. They pressed 2 slices together to make sandwiches. They cut each sandwich in half. Some mothers toasted bread first to make it warm and crunchy. Some mothers sprinkled tiny bit of salt on peanut butter to enhance flavor. Some mothers added sliced bananas when they had them. Most ate it plain with glass of water or milk. The bread tasted filling and satisfying. Peanut butter stuck to roof of mouth in familiar way. Children felt full for hours after eating this simple supper. The secret was buying cheapest store-brand peanut butter that stretched further and tasted just as good. 10 forgotten 10-minute suppers, from Clara's Poorman's meal to peanut butter bread, each cost under 20 cents and required no fancy ingredients. Every recipe used what families already owned. Every dish cooked or assembled in 10 minutes maximum. These simple suppers kept Depression families fed when money and time ran out. Vinegar cobbler became the shocking Depression dessert supper because mothers baked this when fruit disappeared completely from markets and stores. The recipe used vinegar to mimic tartness of berries and apples. This forgotten sweet dish tasted surprisingly delicious despite its strange ingredient list. Every batch cost less than 10 cents and fed 6 people easily with leftovers for next day. Mothers mixed 1 cup of flour with 1 cup of sugar in a bowl. They added ½ cup of melted butter and stirred until crumbly. They pressed half the mixture into greased baking dish. They made syrup by boiling 1 cup of water with ½ cup of sugar and 2 tablespoons of white vinegar for 3 minutes. They poured hot syrup over crumb layer. They sprinkled remaining crumb mixture over top. They baked it at 350 degrees for 25 minutes until golden brown. They served it warm. The cobbler tasted sweet and tangy like real fruit cobbler. Vinegar created necessary tartness. Crumb topping added buttery sweetness. The secret was using white vinegar that mimicked berry flavor better than apple cider vinegar. Tomato gravy became the Southern poor family staple because mothers made this when no meat remained for breakfast or supper protein. The gravy used canned tomatoes and flour to create something filling and hot that stuck to ribs. This forgotten dish cost less than 15 cents and satisfied hungry families completely. Every Southern grandmother knew this recipe by heart and passed it down through generations. Mothers melted 3 tablespoons of butter in cast-iron skillet over medium heat. They whisked in 3 tablespoons of flour to make roux. They cooked roux 2 minutes while stirring constantly until it turned light brown. They slowly added 1 can of diced tomatoes with juice while whisking to prevent lumps. They added 1 cup of milk and stirred until smooth. They cooked everything 5 more minutes until thick. They seasoned with salt, black pepper, and pinch of sugar. They toasted white bread slices. They ladled hot tomato gravy over toast. The gravy tasted tangy and rich. Tomatoes provided acid and sweetness. Roux made it thick and satisfying. Families sopped up every drop with bread. The secret was adding sugar that balanced tomato acid perfectly. Fried bread dough became the quick supper mothers made because frying filled hungry bellies faster than waiting for bread to bake in ovens. Children called these doughboys and ate them hot from skillets before they cooled. Mothers made this when bread dough rose, but no time remained for proper baking. This quick-fried supper took 8 minutes total from dough to plate. Mothers pinched off golf ball-sized pieces of risen bread dough. They flattened each piece into round disc about ½ inch thick. They heated 2 tablespoons of lard or oil in cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They fried each dough piece 2 to 3 minutes per side until golden brown and puffy. They drained them on newspaper or clean towels. They served them hot with butter and sugar for sweet suppers or with gravy for savory suppers. The doughboys tasted crispy outside and soft inside. They puffed up like donuts, but tasted like fried bread. Children ate these standing at stove before sitting down. The secret was frying them in hot fat that cooked them fast and kept them grease-free. Creamed eggs on toast became the gentleman's poor supper because bachelors made this when living alone in boarding houses without kitchens. Mothers also served this for quick Sunday suppers after church services ended. The dish used simple ingredients to create something that looked fancy enough for company. This forgotten supper cost 20 cents and impressed everyone who ate it at the table. Mothers melted 2 tablespoons of butter in saucepan over medium heat. They whisked in 2 tablespoons of flour and cooked it 1 minute. They slowly added 1½ cups of milk while whisking until smooth. They cooked sauce 5 minutes until thick. They hard-boiled 4 eggs, peeled them, and chopped them into chunks. They stirred chopped eggs into cream sauce. They seasoned with salt, white pepper, and pinch of paprika. They toasted 4 slices of white bread and cut them diagonally into triangles. They arranged toast points on plates. They spooned creamed eggs over toast. The dish tasted rich and elegant. Cream sauce coated every piece of egg. Toast soaked up extra sauce perfectly. The secret was using white pepper that kept sauce looking clean and expensive. Hot dog gravy became the weekend supper mothers made because this transformed leftover mashed potatoes into complete meals when the week's meat budget ran out. The gravy used sliced hot dogs instead of expensive beef or chicken. This forgotten combination fed families for under 30 cents total per meal. Children requested this dish even when better options returned to the table after payday. Mothers melted 2 tablespoons of butter in skillet over medium heat. They whisked in 3 tablespoons of flour to make roux. They cooked it 2 minutes while stirring constantly. They slowly poured in 2 cups of milk while whisking to prevent lumps. They sliced 4 hot dogs into rounds and added them to gravy. They cooked everything 5 minutes until thick. They seasoned with salt, black pepper, and onion powder. They scooped leftover mashed potatoes onto plates. They ladled hot dog gravy over potatoes. They served it with slice of white bread. The gravy tasted savory and filling. Hot dogs added protein and salt. Potatoes absorbed gravy perfectly. Families cleaned their plates every time. The secret was using real butter that made cheap ingredients taste expensive. 15 forgotten 10-minute suppers, from vinegar cobbler to hot dog gravy, each fed families for pennies using pantry staples. Every recipe required 1 skillet or saucepan. Every dish cooked in 10 minutes or less. These simple suppers proved good food didn't need expensive ingredients or complicated techniques to satisfy hungry families. Soup beans with cornbread became the Appalachian supper that fed mountain families through every Depression winter because this combination provided complete protein and filled bellies for hours. Mothers cooked big pots of beans on wood stoves and served them with crumbled cornbread. The meal cost less than 20 cents and fed 8 people easily. Every mountain family ate this at least 3 times weekly year-round. Mothers opened 2 cans of pinto beans and poured them into saucepan with liquid. They heated beans over medium heat for 5 minutes until bubbling. They seasoned with salt, black pepper, and pinch of sugar. They crumbled day-old cornbread into shallow bowls. They ladled hot beans with liquid over cornbread crumbles. Some mothers added chopped onions on top. Some mothers added dash of hot pepper sauce for heat. The beans turned soft and creamy. Cornbread absorbed bean liquid and became soft. Together, they created complete protein meal. Families ate this with spoons like soup. The secret was using day-old cornbread that soaked up bean liquid without turning to complete mush. Rice in milk became the quick supper mothers made when absolutely nothing else remained except these 3 pantry staples. The dish appeared across immigrant communities from Scandinavia to Latin America, with slight variations. Mothers cooked this in 8 minutes flat for crying hungry children. This forgotten sweet supper cost less than 10 cents and quieted complaining immediately with warm satisfaction. Mothers boiled 2 cups of whole milk in saucepan over medium heat. They added 1 cup of cooked leftover white rice. They stirred everything together and heated it 3 minutes until rice absorbed milk. They spooned it into bowls. They sprinkled 2 tablespoons of white sugar over each bowl. Some mothers added cinnamon or nutmeg if they had spices. Some mothers added raisins when available. Most served it plain and warm. The rice turned soft and creamy. Milk made it rich. Sugar added sweetness children loved. This tasted like rice pudding but took no time to make. The secret was using yesterday's leftover rice that absorbed milk quickly and created creamy texture without long cooking. Buttered noodles became the Bachelor supper and children's favorite because 3 ingredients created satisfying comfort food in under 10 minutes. Mothers made this when absolutely nothing remained in the house except pasta and butter. The dish appeared on tables worldwide as the simplest possible hot meal. Every family ate this at least once weekly during lean times without complaint or shame. Mothers boiled water in large pot with generous salt added. They cooked 8 ounces of egg noodles according to package directions for 7 minutes. They drained noodles and returned them to hot pot. They added 3 tablespoons of butter and tossed until melted and coating every noodle. They added generous black pepper and more salt to taste. They served immediately while steaming hot. The noodles tasted rich and buttery. Pepper added slight heat. Salt enhanced everything perfectly. Children ate bowls of this standing at the stove. The secret was using enough butter and salting pasta water heavily that made plain noodles taste delicious enough to satisfy everyone. Fried cabbage became the depression supper mothers made when vegetables cost less than meat, because 1 head of cabbage fed 6 people for under 10 cents total. The dish cooked quickly in hot skillets and filled houses with sweet caramelized smells. This forgotten vegetable supper appeared on tables 3 times weekly during winter months when fresh produce disappeared from markets completely. Mothers sliced half head of cabbage into thin strips. They chopped 1 yellow onion into pieces. They heated 2 tablespoons of butter or lard in large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They added cabbage and onions together. They stirred everything constantly for 8 minutes until cabbage wilted and browned on edges. They seasoned with salt, black pepper, and pinch of sugar. They served it hot from skillet with cornbread on side. The cabbage turned sweet and tender. Onions caramelized into soft bits. Brown edges added slight crispness. This tasted nothing like boiled cabbage people hated. The secret was high heat and constant stirring that caramelized natural sugars and eliminated bitter cabbage flavor. Potato hash browns became the all-day supper because mothers fried these for breakfast and served leftovers cold for lunch and reheated them for supper. 1 batch of hash browns cost 15 cents and appeared at 3 meals in single day. This simple skillet dish used potatoes families bought in 50-pound sacks. Every household across America knew how to make perfect crispy hash browns by heart. Mothers peeled and grated 3 large raw potatoes. They squeezed grated potatoes in clean towel to remove excess water. They heated 3 tablespoons of butter or lard in large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They pressed potato shreds flat across entire skillet surface. They seasoned with salt and black pepper. They fried them 5 minutes without touching until bottom turned golden and crispy. They flipped them in sections and fried other side 5 more minutes. The hash browns turned crispy outside and tender inside. Edges became extra crunchy and brown. These tasted better than restaurant versions. The secret was squeezing out water and not stirring that created maximum crispiness. 20 forgotten 10-minute suppers, from Clara's Poorman's meal to potato hash browns, each cost under 30 cents and fed families using simple pantry ingredients. Every recipe required 1 skillet or pot. Every dish took 10 minutes or less. These suppers kept Depression families alive when money disappeared and time remained short. Bachelor's supper became the working man's go-to meal because 1 can of corned beef, hash-fried in a skillet, created a complete hot supper in under 8 minutes without any cooking skills required. Single men living alone in boarding houses made this every night after factory shifts ended. Mothers also made this on laundry days when no time remained for complicated cooking. The dish cost 35 cents and fed 2 people easily. Everyone recognized the distinctive smell of frying hash coming from Bachelor apartments across every American city. Bachelors opened 1 can of corned beef hash and dumped entire contents into a hot greased skillet. They spread hash flat across the skillet bottom with a spatula. They let it fry over medium-high heat without stirring for 5 minutes until the bottom formed a crispy brown crust. They flipped it in sections like a pancake and fried the other side 3 more minutes. Some men cracked 2 eggs directly on top during the last 2 minutes and covered the skillet with a lid to steam the eggs. They slid everything onto a plate and ate it with saltine crackers and hot coffee. The hash tasted salty and rich with crispy edges. Potatoes in the hash turned golden. Corned beef added protein and substance. 'Tis the eggs created runny yolks that mixed into everything. This filled bellies completely until morning. The secret was not stirring the hash that allowed maximum crust formation on both sides, making cheap canned meat taste homemade and delicious. Widow's plate became the lonely supper elderly women made when cooking for one person seemed pointless because scrambled eggs and toast required no measuring and created no leftovers to waste. Widows living alone after husbands died ate this simple meal 3 times weekly. Young mothers also served this to toddlers who loved dipping toast strips into soft eggs. The dish cost less than 10 cents and took 6 minutes from start to finish. This gentle supper brought comfort without requiring effort or energy. Widows cracked 3 eggs into a bowl and beat them with a fork until yolks and whites combined. They added splash of milk and pinch of salt. They melted 1 tablespoon of butter in a small skillet over low heat. They poured in beaten eggs. They stirred eggs gently with a wooden spoon in slow figure-8 motions for 4 minutes until they formed soft curds. They removed eggs from heat while still slightly wet because residual heat finished cooking them. They toasted 2 slices of white bread and cut them into strips called soldiers. They arranged toast soldiers on a plate beside the scrambled eggs. The eggs tasted creamy and soft. Toast strips stayed crispy for dipping into runny eggs. Butter made everything rich, despite simplicity. This supper satisfied without overwhelming. The secret was low heat and constant gentle stirring that created the softest, creamiest scrambled eggs that felt like a warm hug on a lonely evening. Milkman's lunch became the depression supper families ate when no money remained for hot food because 1 box of cornflakes and 1 can of evaporated milk fed everyone for under 25 cents total. Fathers working night shifts ate this cold meal before leaving for factories. Children ate this for breakfast and supper on the same day during the worst weeks. The dish required no cooking and no cleanup beyond rinsing bowls. Every American family ate cereal for supper at least once during hard times. Fathers poured cornflakes or other cheap cereal into bowls for each family member. Or they opened 1 can of evaporated milk and poured it into a measuring cup. They added equal amount of water to the evaporated milk and stirred to reconstitute it. They poured the thinned milk over cereal in each bowl. Some families added 1 spoonful of sugar over the cereal, if any sugar remained. Some families used the evaporated milk straight from the can, without diluting it when they wanted something that felt richer. Most families ate this quickly, before cereal turned completely soggy. The cereal tasted sweet from added malt. Evaporated milk tasted richer and thicker than regular milk. This cold supper required no energy to prepare after exhausting workdays. Children complained less than expected because cereal felt like a treat. The secret was evaporated milk that cost less than fresh milk and lasted months on the shelf without refrigeration, making it the perfect depression staple. Bread sop became the elderly person's supper because toothless grandparents could eat soft-soaked bread when chewing became impossible. Depression children also ate this when nothing else remained in the house except stale bread and morning coffee dregs. Pennsylvania Dutch families called this brat sup and served it regularly. Italian immigrants made pane cotto with similar ingredients. This forgotten supper cost absolutely nothing because it used what would otherwise be thrown away. Grandparents tore stale bread into chunks and placed them in deep bowls. They poured hot leftover coffee over the bread pieces until covered. They added 2 tablespoons of sugar and 1 tablespoon of butter to each bowl. They let bread soak 3 minutes until completely soft. Some families used warm milk instead of coffee for children. Some families added cinnamon or nutmeg if spices were available. Some families mashed everything together into porridge consistency. Most ate it as soon as bread softened enough to eat with a spoon. The bread tasted sweet and coffee-flavored. Butter melted into creamy pockets throughout. This warm mush went down easily without chewing. The coffee added slight bitterness that sugar balanced. This humble supper filled bellies and used every scrap. The secret was day-old bread that soaked up liquid better than fresh bread and transformed from garbage into a complete meal that kept elderly people and young children fed when nothing else remained available. Depression. Sandwich became the school lunch every poor child recognized because these 3 ingredients appeared in every household, no matter how empty cupboards became. Children made these themselves when mothers worked factory jobs and couldn't pack lunches. The sandwich cost less than 5 cents to make. Teachers recognized depression sandwiches immediately and sometimes shared their own lunches with children carrying them. This forgotten sandwich represented poverty and hunger in every American classroom during the 1930s. Children took 2 slices of white bread from the loaf. They spread mayonnaise on one slice. They spread ketchup on the other slice. They pressed the slices together to make a sandwich. Some children added salt and pepper if available. Some children added thin-sliced onions from the garden. Some children toasted the bread first to make it feel more substantial. Most ate it plain, exactly as assembled, without additions. They wrapped sandwiches in waxed paper and carried them to school in lunch pails or paper bags. The sandwich tasted tangy from ketchup and creamy from mayonnaise. The combination wasn't delicious, but it was edible. This provided something to eat when nothing else existed. Children traded these sandwiches reluctantly because everyone knew what they meant. The secret was that this sandwich required no refrigeration and lasted all morning without spoiling, making it perfect for children walking miles to school in all weather without ice boxes or thermoses to keep food cold. Forgotten 10-minute suppers, bachelor's supper, widow's plate, milkman's lunch, bread sop, and depression sandwich, each cost under 35 cents and required almost no cooking. Every recipe used what families already owned. Every dish took 10 minutes or less. These simple meals fed America's loneliest and poorest through hardest times. Potato soup with rivels became the Pennsylvania Dutch supper that turned watery potato broth into something substantial because tiny flour dumplings called rivels added body and texture to thin soup. German immigrant families made this weekly when meat budgets disappeared. The soup cost 20 cents and fed 6 people with second helpings. This forgotten dish combined potatoes and flour into a complete hot meal. Every Pennsylvania kitchen produced this soup throughout winter months when nothing fresh grew. Mothers boiled 4 cups of water in a large pot. They added 3 peeled and diced potatoes. They cooked potatoes 15 minutes until tender. Meanwhile, they made rivels by mixing 1 cup of flour with 1 beaten egg and pinch of salt until crumbly. They rubbed the mixture between their fingers to create tiny, irregular dumplings. They dropped rivels into the boiling potato soup, a handful at a time, while stirring constantly. They cooked everything 5 more minutes until rivels floated and turned tender. They added 2 tablespoons of butter and seasoned with salt and black pepper. They ladled soup into bowls. The soup tasted creamy from potatoes. Rivels added chewy dumplings throughout. Butter made the broth rich. This simple soup satisfied completely. Families sopped up every drop with bread. The secret was making rivels small and irregular that cooked quickly and created interesting texture in every spoonful, making plain potato water transform into legitimate filling soup. Fried egg on butter noodles became the college student supper because this combination required only 3 ingredients and 1 pan to create something satisfying. Poor students living in shared housing made this on hot plates in their rooms. Factory workers ate this for midnight shift dinners. The meal cost 15 cents and took 8 minutes total. This simple combination appeared across immigrant communities with slight variations, but the same basic concept of protein over starch. Students boiled water in a pot with salt added. They cooked 4 ounces of egg noodles for 7 minutes. They drained noodles and tossed them with 2 tablespoons of butter. They divided buttered noodles between 2 plates. Meanwhile, they fried 2 eggs in butter in a hot skillet until whites set, but yolks stayed runny. They slid 1 fried egg on top of each portion of noodles. They seasoned with salt and black pepper. Some students added grated cheese if they had any. Some students added hot sauce or ketchup for flavor. Most ate it plain and hot. The noodles tasted rich with butter coating every strand. The fried egg yolk broke and mixed into noodles, creating sauce. Egg whites added protein. This combination satisfied hunger completely. Students requested this even after graduating and getting better jobs. The secret was runny yolk that created natural creamy sauce, coating the buttered noodles, making 2 simple ingredients taste like complete restaurant-quality carbonara, despite costing almost nothing. Cornmeal mush, fry with molasses, became the Southern breakfast for supper favorite because fried cornmeal slices with dark molasses cost less than pancakes and filled bellies longer. Sharecropper families ate this 3 times weekly when wheat flour ran out. 1 batch of cornmeal mush lasted 3 days, sliced and fried as needed. The meal cost less than 10 cents per person. This forgotten supper tasted better than most remember with the right molasses and proper frying technique. Mothers cooked cornmeal mush by boiling 3 cups of water in a saucepan. They whisked in 1 cup of yellow cornmeal slowly to prevent lumps. They cooked it 10 minutes while stirring constantly until very thick. They poured hot mush into a greased loaf pan and refrigerated until firm. They sliced cold mush into half-inch slices. They heated 3 tablespoons of bacon grease or butter in a cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They fried mush slices 4 minutes per side until crusty and golden brown. They arranged fried slices on plates. They drizzled dark molasses over hot fried mush. Some families used sorghum syrup instead. Some families added butter on top before molasses. The fried mush tasted crispy outside with creamy interior. Molasses added deep sweet flavor with slight bitterness. This combination satisfied sweet cravings and hunger simultaneously. Children ate this, standing at the stove. The secret was overnight chilling and high-heat frying that created maximum crispiness, making humble cornmeal taste like expensive restaurant fare. Cornbread became the Southern poor family's daily bread because cornmeal cost half the price of wheat flour and hot water was free. Mothers fried these in cast-iron skillets when ovens broke or when no time remained for baking. The recipe used 3 ingredients total. These fried cakes cost less than 5 cents per batch and accompanied every meal. This forgotten bread disappeared from tables when cheap white bread became widely available in the 1950s. Mothers poured 2 cups of yellow cornmeal into a mixing bowl. They added 1 teaspoon of salt. They poured in enough boiling water while stirring until the mixture formed thick dough that held together. They let it rest 2 minutes. They shaped dough into flat oval cakes about 3 inches long and ½ inch thick, using wet hands to prevent sticking. They heated ½ inch of oil or lard in a cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They fried cakes 3 minutes per side until golden brown and crispy. They drained them on newspaper. They served them hot. The cornbread tasted crispy outside with tender, slightly grainy interior. The crust turned golden and crunchy. These were nothing like baked cornbread people know today. Families used these to sop up pot liquor and gravies. They ate them with molasses for dessert. The secret was boiling water that partially cooked the cornmeal, immediately creating tender interior. Scrambled egg sandwich with Miracle Whip became the quick supper working mothers made, because this sandwich assembled in 5 minutes and required only 3 ingredients. Factory women returning home exhausted from shifts made these for children waiting for dinner. The sandwich cost 10 cents and satisfied completely. Miracle Whip specifically appeared in this recipe because it cost less than real mayonnaise during Depression years. Every family kept a jar in the icebox for exactly this purpose. Mothers cracked 3 eggs into a bowl and beat them with a fork. They added pinch of salt. They melted 1 tablespoon of butter in a small skillet over low heat. They poured in eggs and stirred gently until they formed soft scrambled curds. They removed eggs from heat while slightly underdone. They toasted 4 slices of white bread. They spread Miracle Whip on all 4 slices. They divided scrambled eggs between 2 slices. They topped with remaining bread slices to make 2 sandwiches. They cut each sandwich in half diagonally. Some mothers added salt and pepper to eggs. Some mothers added thin sliced onions if available. The eggs tasted creamy and soft. Miracle Whip added tangy flavor and moisture. Toast provided crunch. This sandwich satisfied hunger immediately. Children ate these without complaint. The secret was Miracle Whip instead of regular mayonnaise that added sweet tanginess and cost less making. The sandwich tastes more interesting than plain egg sandwiches while stretching the Depression budget further. 10 forgotten meals, from Bachelor's supper to scrambled egg sandwich, each cost under 35 cents and took 10 minutes or less. Every recipe used basic pantry staples. Every dish required 1 pan maximum. These simple suppers fed America's working poor through the Depression and post-war years when time and money both disappeared. Campbell's tomato soup with saltine crackers became America's most famous quick supper because 1 can of soup and 1 sleeve of crackers cost 30 cents total and fed 3 people adequately. Mothers made this when absolutely nothing else remained in the cupboard. The red and white Campbell's can appeared in every American kitchen during the Depression. Children recognized this meal immediately and knew money was tight. This simple combination became iconic enough that Andy Warhol painted it decades later as symbol of American poverty and persistence. Mothers opened 1 can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup and poured it into a saucepan. They added 1 can of water or milk, depending on what was available. They heated soup over medium heat while stirring occasionally for 5 minutes until it bubbled. They ladled hot soup into bowls. They opened 1 sleeve of saltine crackers and divided them between plates. Some families crumbled crackers directly into soup. Some families floated crackers on top. Most ate crackers on the side, dipping them into soup until they softened. Some mothers added butter to soup for richness. Some mothers added pinch of sugar to cut acidity. The soup tasted sweet and tangy. Saltines added salt and crunch. The combination satisfied despite simplicity. This represented both poverty and comfort simultaneously. Sick children requested this specifically. The secret was using milk instead of water that transformed cheap canned soup into creamy tomato bisque, making 29 cents. Egg and onion sandwich became the Jewish immigrant poor supper because these ingredients cost almost nothing and stayed fresh without refrigeration. Elderly immigrants living alone made this for lunch and supper, and the sandwich provided protein and strong flavor that satisfied with minimal ingredients. This forgotten combination cost less than 10 cents. Every Eastern European Jewish grandmother knew this recipe. Children grew up eating these sandwiches and later recognized them as symbols of immigrant poverty and survival. Grandmothers hard-boiled 4 eggs in boiling water for 10 minutes. They cooled eggs under cold running water and peeled them. They chopped hard-boiled eggs into small pieces. They finely diced 1 small yellow onion. They mixed chopped eggs and onions together in a bowl. They added 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise and stirred until combined. They added salt and black pepper generously. They spread egg mixture on sliced rye bread or white bread depending on what they could afford. They topped with second bread slice to make sandwiches. They cut sandwiches in half. Some grandmothers added pinch of paprika. Some added chopped fresh dill if they grew it. The eggs tasted creamy from mayonnaise. Raw onions added sharp bite and crunch. Salt and pepper enhanced everything. This sandwich satisfied completely, despite humble ingredients. The combination tasted better than some of its parts. The secret was generous amounts of black pepper and raw onion that transformed plain, hard-boiled eggs into something bold and memorable, making poverty food taste intentional. Coffee soup became the shocking supper that represented absolute poverty because families ate this only when literally nothing else remained. Rural German and Scandinavian communities ate this regularly as traditional dish called Kaffeesuppe. American families discovered it during the Depression's worst years. This soup used morning coffee leftovers and stale bread that would otherwise be discarded. The meal cost nothing because it used garbage. Modern people cannot believe families actually ate this, but millions did throughout the 1930s. Mothers reheated leftover breakfast coffee until steaming hot. They tore stale bread into chunks and placed them in bowls. They poured hot coffee over bread until covered. They added 2 tablespoons of sugar per bowl. They added 1 tablespoon of butter to each bowl if any remained. They let bread soak 2 minutes until completely soft. Some families added cinnamon. Some families added splash of milk or cream if available. Some families mashed everything together. Most ate it as soon as bread softened enough to spoon up. Children gagged initially but eventually accepted it. The soup tasted bittersweet from coffee and sugar. Bread turned mushy and brown. Butter made it slightly rich. This filled empty stomachs when nothing else existed. Families never spoke about eating this afterward. The secret was strong coffee and enough sugar to make it palatable, making this emergency survival food barely edible but sufficient to prevent starvation when cupboards held nothing else. Government cheese on white bread became the welfare supper because 5-pound blocks of orange government cheese appeared in every poor household during the 1960s and 1970s. Families on food assistance received these processed cheese blocks monthly. Children immediately recognized government cheese by its distinctive orange color and plastic texture. Mothers grilled sandwiches to make the cheese palatable. This forgotten sandwich represented government assistance and poverty. Everyone who ate it remembered it decades later with mixed emotions. Mothers cut thick slices from the government cheese block. They buttered both sides of 2 slices of white bread. They placed cheese between bread slices. They heated a skillet over medium heat with no additional butter needed because bread was already buttered. They placed sandwich in hot skillet. They pressed it flat with a spatula. They grilled it 3 minutes per side until bread turned golden and cheese melted. They cut sandwich diagonally. Some mothers added tomato slices if available. Some added onions. Most served it plain because nothing else existed. Children ate these after school every day for years. The cheese tasted salty and slightly plastic. Grilling improved the texture considerably. Bread turned crispy and buttery. The hot sandwich satisfied hungry children. Government cheese became nostalgic despite representing poverty. The secret was butter on the bread and slow grilling that transformed rubbery processed cheese into melted creamy filling, making welfare food taste homemade. Cheese Dreams became the 1950s ladies' luncheon sandwich that poor families adopted for quick suppers because the fancy name made cheap ingredients sound elegant. Church cookbooks published hundreds of Cheese Dreams recipes with slight variations. Mothers made these when unexpected guests arrived because they looked impressive but cost pennies. The dish baked instead of grilling, making it feel more refined. This forgotten sandwich bridged the gap between poverty food and middle-class entertaining perfectly. Mothers beat 2 eggs with half-cup of milk in a shallow bowl. They added pinch of salt and dash of paprika. They dipped white bread slices in the egg mixture, coating both sides. They placed soaked bread on a greased baking sheet. They topped each bread slice with 1 thick slice of cheese. Some mothers used American cheese. Some used cheddar. Some used whatever existed. They baked sandwiches at 350 degrees for 12 minutes until cheese melted and bubbled. They served them immediately, while hot. Some mothers added bacon if available. Some added tomato slices. Most served them plain. The bread turned custardy from egg coating. Cheese melted and browned on top. These tasted richer than regular grilled cheese. The fancy name made children feel special. Ladies at church luncheons ate these on good china. The secret was egg-soaked bread that transformed simple cheese toast into something that felt luxurious, making poor families feel temporarily elegant. 35 forgotten 10-minute suppers, from Clara's Poorman's Meal to Cheese Dreams, fed depression and 1950s families for pennies. Every recipe used simple ingredients. Every dish took 10 minutes or less. These suppers proved families could eat well without money or time. Which one did your grandmother make every week? Welsh rarebit became the fancy name for poor man's supper because melted cheese sauce over toast sounded sophisticated when called by its proper British name. Mothers served this when trying to make simple ingredients feel special for Sunday suppers. The dish appeared in every American cookbook from the 1920s through the 1960s. This forgotten cheese supper cost 30 cents and tasted like restaurant food despite being made at home in 10 minutes. Mothers melted 2 tablespoons of butter in a saucepan over medium heat. They whisked in 2 tablespoons of flour and cooked it 1 minute to make roux. They slowly added 1 cup of milk while whisking constantly to prevent lumps. They cooked sauce 3 minutes until it thickened. They added 2 cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese and stirred until completely melted. They added 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, 1 teaspoon of mustard powder, and pinch of cayenne pepper. They stirred everything until smooth. They toasted 4 slices of bread until golden. They placed toast on plates. They ladled hot cheese sauce generously over each toast slice. The cheese sauce tasted rich and sharp. Worcestershire sauce added depth. Mustard and cayenne gave slight tang and heat. Toast stayed crispy on bottom and soaked up cheese on top. Families ate this with knives and forks like proper dinner. Some mothers added sliced tomatoes on the toast before adding cheese sauce. Some mothers topped it with crispy crumbled crackers. The secret was using sharp cheddar cheese and adding Worcestershire sauce that elevated simple cheese on toast into something special families requested repeatedly. Fried potato and egg skillet became the supper mothers made when breakfast foods filled bellies better than dinner foods. The concept of breakfast for dinner started during the Depression when eggs cost less than meat. This one-pan meal combined two cheap ingredients into something satisfying and hot. Every family ate this at least once weekly when paychecks stretched thin and pantries emptied out before shopping day arrived. Mothers peeled and diced 2 large potatoes into small cubes. They heated 3 tablespoons of butter or lard in a large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They added potato cubes and fried them 8 minutes, while stirring occasionally until they turned golden brown and crispy on edges. They pushed potatoes to the sides of the skillet to make space in the center. They cracked 4 eggs directly into the center space. They covered the skillet with a lid and cooked 3 more minutes until egg whites set, but yolks stayed runny. They seasoned everything with salt and black pepper. They served it straight from the skillet with forks. The potatoes tasted crispy and golden. Eggs cooked perfectly with runny yolks that broke and coated the potatoes. This created natural sauce without adding anything extra. Families ate this for dinner and felt satisfied despite its simplicity. Some mothers added diced onions with the potatoes. Some mothers added cheese over the eggs before covering them. Most ate it plain and called it comfort. The secret was creating space in the skillet center for eggs that cooked perfectly while potatoes stayed hot and crispy on the sides. Tomato soup over rice became the quick supper mothers made when canned soup and leftover rice sat in the pantry waiting to become dinner. The combination sounded strange to modern families, but Depression households ate this regularly because soup stretched further when poured over grains. This forgotten meal cost 15 cents and fed 4 people easily. Every family discovered this combination independently during hard times when creativity stretched limited ingredients. Mothers cooked 1 cup of white rice in 2 cups of water until tender about 15 minutes, or used leftover rice from previous meals. They heated 1 can of Campbell's tomato soup in a saucepan over medium heat for 5 minutes without adding water like the can directions usually suggested. They wanted concentrated soup, not thin soup, for this dish. They spooned hot cooked rice into shallow bowls. They ladled hot, undiluted tomato soup over the rice. They stirred everything together. Some mothers added a pat of butter on top. Some mothers sprinkled grated cheese over it. Some mothers added black pepper and onion powder for extra flavor. The rice absorbed tomato soup and turned soft and flavorful. Concentrated soup created almost gravy-like consistency. This tasted similar to Spanish rice, but cost less and took no time to prepare. Families ate this with saltine crackers on the side. Children loved this combination because tomato soup always tasted good and rice made it more filling. Nobody complained when this appeared on the dinner table again and again. The secret was not diluting the soup with water that created thick consistency and stronger tomato flavor that coated rice perfectly. Crackers and milk became the Depression dessert supper that children ate before bed when nothing else remained for evening meals. Grandparents remembered eating this during their childhoods in the early 1900s and passed it down through generations. The dish combined 3 ingredients every household kept until the absolute last day before shopping. This forgotten sweet supper cost less than 5 cents per person and satisfied hungry children enough to sleep through the night. All mothers placed 6 to 8 saltine crackers in the bottom of a bowl. They broke crackers into smaller pieces with their hands. They poured 1 cup of cold milk over the crackers until they were completely covered. They sprinkled 2 tablespoons of white sugar over everything. They let it sit 1 minute for crackers to soften slightly, but not turn to complete mush. They handed the bowl with a spoon to children. Some mothers added cinnamon on top. Some mothers used sweet graham crackers instead of saltines. Some mothers heated the milk first to make it warm and comforting. The crackers softened just enough to eat with spoons. Milk sweetened from sugar tasted like dessert. This combination filled stomachs and felt like treat despite being poverty food. Children ate this sitting at the kitchen table before brushing teeth and going to bed. Mothers ate this too when adult supper got skipped to make sure children ate first. Nobody talked about how poor this meal was. Families just ate it and were grateful. The secret was timing the soaking perfectly so crackers softened but kept some texture and didn't dissolve into paste. Pancakes for dinner became the special treat mothers served when breakfast foods cost less than dinner foods, and children cheered instead of complained. The concept of eating breakfast at supper time started during the Depression, when eggs and flour cost pennies, but meat and vegetables cost dollars. This tradition continued through the 1950s and 1960s as quick weeknight solution. Every family ate breakfast for dinner at least twice monthly without thinking it strange or wrong. Mothers mixed 1½ cups of flour with 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and ½ teaspoon of salt in a bowl. They whisked 1 egg with 1 cup of milk and 2 tablespoons of melted butter in another bowl. They poured wet ingredients into dry ingredients and stirred just until combined with lumps remaining. They heated a griddle or large skillet over medium heat and greased it with butter. They poured 1/4 cup portions of batter onto hot griddle. They cooked pancakes 2 minutes until bubbles formed on top. They flipped them and cooked 2 more minutes until golden. They stacked hot pancakes on plates. They served them with butter and maple syrup or molasses. The pancakes tasted fluffy and slightly sweet. Butter melted into every layer. Syrup soaked through the stack and pooled on the plate. Children ate these for dinner and felt like they got away with something special. Some mothers served scrambled eggs on the side. Some mothers added chocolate chips to the batter. Most served them plain and warm. The secret was not overmixing the batter that kept pancakes light and fluffy instead of tough and dense. 40 forgotten 10-minute suppers, from Clara's poorman's meal to pancakes for dinner, fed families for pennies during the Depression and 1950s. Every recipe used simple pantry ingredients. Every dish took 10 minutes or less. These suppers saved families when money ran out. Which one did your mother make every week? Midnight supper became the working man's late-night meal because factory workers returning home after midnight shifts needed something hot and fast that didn't wake sleeping families. Single men living alone in boarding houses made this every night before bed. The dish took 4 minutes total from start to finish and required only 3 ingredients every household kept. This forgotten supper represented the quiet, solitary meals men ate in dimly lit kitchens after everyone else slept. The name midnight supper appeared in cookbooks from the 1920s through the 1950s, describing exactly this simple combination. Men toasted 2 slices of white bread in a toaster or under the broiler until they turned golden brown on both sides. They spread softened butter generously on both slices while toast was still hot, so butter melted into the bread completely. They placed buttered toast on a plate. They heated 1 tablespoon of butter in a small skillet over medium heat until it foamed and bubbled. They cracked 2 eggs into the hot skillet, being careful not to break the yolks. They fried the eggs 2 to 3 minutes until the whites set completely, but the yolks remained runny in the center. They carefully slid the fried eggs on top of the buttered toast using a spatula. They seasoned everything with salt and black pepper. They carefully slid the fried eggs on top of the buttered toast using a spatula. They seasoned everything with salt and black pepper. Some men added hot sauce or ketchup on top. Some men added a slice of cheese under the eggs before they finished cooking. Most ate it plain exactly as prepared with just butter, eggs, salt, and pepper. The toast stayed crispy on the bottom from the first toasting, but absorbed butter and eventually some runny yolk. The eggs tasted rich from being fried in butter. When men cut into the eggs with their forks, the golden yolks broke and ran all over the toast, creating natural sauce. This simple combination satisfied hunger immediately, without requiring thought or skill. Men ate this standing at the kitchen counter or sitting alone at the table, reading the evening newspaper. The meal filled bellies enough to sleep through to morning. This represented bachelor life and shift work and the kind of simple, adequate food men made for themselves when no one else was cooking for them. The secret was using plenty of butter on both the toast and in the skillet for frying the eggs that made three simple ingredients taste rich and satisfying enough to end a long, hard workday perfectly. Railroad supper became the meal traveling salesmen and railway workers carried because hard-boiled eggs and crackers required no refrigeration and survived long train journeys without spoiling. Men working on railroad crews ate this every night in bunkhouses and rail yards across America. The combination cost 15 cents and provided complete portable protein that kept for days. This forgotten supper represented the mobile working class who moved constantly for jobs during the Depression and post-war boom years. Every man who worked away from home knew this meal intimately. Men hard-boiled 6 eggs by placing them in a pot and covering them with cold water. They brought water to a full rolling boil over high heat. They immediately removed the pot from heat and covered it with a lid. They let eggs sit in hot water for 12 minutes exactly. They drained hot water and ran cold water over eggs until they cooled completely. They peeled the eggs, carefully removing all shell pieces. They wrapped peeled, hard-boiled eggs in waxed paper or clean cloth. They packed eggs in their lunch pails along with 1 sleeve of saltine crackers. Some men added a small salt shaker to their lunch pails. Some men included a piece of fruit if available. Most carried just eggs and crackers and called it sufficient. Men ate this supper sitting on bunks or benches or standing outside railway stations waiting for connections. They peeled and ate hard-boiled eggs one at a time. They ate saltine crackers between bites of egg. They sprinkled salt on each bite if they remembered to pack it. The eggs tasted plain, but provided necessary protein and fat. The crackers added salt and crunch and filled space in stomachs. This wasn't delicious, but it was adequate fuel for men doing physical labor far from home kitchens. The meal required no preparation beyond boiling eggs in the morning or the night before. Men could eat this anywhere at any time, without needing plates or utensils or any kind of heating. This represented survival eating for working men on the move. The secret was hard-boiling eggs properly so they peeled easily without sticking to shells, and packing them carefully so they didn't crack during transport in lunch pails that made this portable meal actually practical for men working away from home for weeks at a time on railway crews and construction sites. Mock oyster stew became the Midwestern supper that imitated fancy coastal oyster stew using only cream, crackers, and butter because real oysters cost too much for inland families during the Depression. Mothers served this on Christmas Eve when tradition demanded oyster stew, but budgets couldn't afford seafood shipped hundreds of miles from oceans. The dish fooled nobody, but tasted good enough that families requested it anyway. This forgotten recipe appeared in church cookbooks across the Midwest throughout the 1930s and 1940s as the acceptable substitute for the real thing. Mothers heated 2 cups of whole milk and 1 cup of heavy cream in a saucepan over medium heat until it steamed but did not boil. They added 3 tablespoons of butter and stirred until it melted completely. They broke 10 to 12 oyster crackers into large pieces and dropped them into the hot cream mixture. They let crackers soak 30 seconds until they softened slightly, but still held some shape. They added ½ teaspoon of salt, quarter teaspoon of white pepper, and tiny pinch of celery salt if they had it. They ladled the hot mock stew into bowls immediately. They dotted each bowl with additional butter. They sprinkled paprika on top for color. Some mothers added a splash of Worcestershire sauce to approximate oyster flavor. Some mothers added tiny bit of fish sauce if they had any. Most served it plain and called it oyster stew anyway. The stew tasted rich and creamy. The crackers softened and created texture similar to oysters if you didn't think too hard about it. The butter made everything taste luxurious. The white pepper added slight heat. This wasn't real oyster stew, but it satisfied the tradition of having oyster stew on Christmas Eve, when Midwestern Lutheran and Catholic families observed this coastal custom, despite living nowhere near oceans. Children who never tasted real oyster stew couldn't tell the difference. Adults knew perfectly well this was fake, but appreciated the effort and the cream and butter and the fact that Mother tried to maintain holiday traditions despite poverty. The ritual mattered more than authenticity. The secret was using real cream instead of milk and adding plenty of butter that created richness approximating oyster stew closely enough to honor the tradition while admitting through the mock name that this was acceptable poverty substitute during hard times when keeping traditions alive mattered more than ingredients. Stone soup became the legendary Depression meal that represented making something from nothing because the folk tale about strangers making soup from stones matched exactly what poor families did every week with vegetable scraps and bones. Mothers saved every leftover bit throughout the week and combined them on Friday or Saturday to create one pot of soup. The dish cost nothing because it used what would otherwise be thrown away as garbage. This wasn't a real recipe with measurements, but rather a concept and survival strategy that millions of families practiced without calling it anything special. Mothers kept a bowl in the icebox all week for collecting scraps. Potato peels went in, onion ends went in, carrot tops went in, celery leaves went in, chicken bones from Sunday dinner went in, leftover cooked vegetables went in, ham bones went in. Anything edible that remained after meals went into the scrap bowl instead of the trash. On soup day, mothers dumped everything into a large pot. They covered it with water. They added generous salt and whatever dried herbs they had like bay leaves or thyme. They brought everything to a boil, then reduced heat to simmer. They cooked it for 2 hours, letting flavors blend and bones release their marrow. They strained out bones and any inedible peels or stems. They served the broth with whatever vegetables had softened enough to eat. They added cooked rice or noodles if any existed. They served it with bread for dipping. The soup tasted different every week depending on what scraps accumulated. Sometimes it tasted like chicken. Sometimes it tasted like vegetables. Sometimes it tasted like almost nothing but hot salt water. Families ate it anyway, because waste was unthinkable, and this represented getting maximum value from every scrap of food that entered the house. The soup filled bellies with hot liquid when solid food ran short. Children heard the stone soup folktale and understood they were living it. Mothers never called it stone soup out loud, but everyone knew that's exactly what it was. This represented rock-bottom poverty cooking when creativity and determination transformed garbage into meals. Grandma's hot milk cake became the quick dessert supper single-serving version that Depression grandmothers made in coffee cups when baking full cakes wasted precious ingredients on just 1 or 2 people living alone. The original hot milk cake recipe dated back to the 1800s, but the mug version appeared during the Depression when elderly widows living alone needed something sweet without making entire cakes. This forgotten single-serving cake cooked in 5 minutes and used 4 basic ingredients. Every elderly woman living alone knew some version of this quick mug cake before microwave ovens made them common again. 70 years later. Grandmothers took one large coffee mug or teacup that could withstand oven heat. They cracked one egg into the mug and beat it with a fork. They added 2 tablespoons of white sugar and beat it until light-colored. They added 3 tablespoons of flour and pinch of salt and stirred until smooth. They heated 2 tablespoons of milk in a small pan until it steamed and bubbled at the edges. They added half tablespoon of butter to the hot milk and stirred until melted. They poured the hot milk mixture into the egg batter and stirred quickly until combined. They placed the mug in a moderate oven around 350 degrees for exactly 5 minutes. They removed it carefully using a towel because the mug was very hot. They let it cool 2 minutes before eating it straight from the mug with a spoon. The cake rose up and formed golden top. The texture was somewhere between cake and custard. It tasted slightly sweet and buttery. The hot milk method created tender crumb that wasn't dry like regular cakes. This satisfied sweet cravings without waste. Rehook: 5 forgotten suppers, midnight supper, railroad supper, mock oyster stew, stone soup, and grandma's hot milk cake, each represented solitary survival meals. Every recipe used what remained. Every dish took minutes to prepare. These suppers fed America's loneliest workers and elderly people when cooking for one person felt pointless, but hunger remained real. Vinegar pie filling became the stovetop dessert supper that Depression families ate straight from pots when sugar existed, but fruit didn't, and baking pies wasted fuel and time. The filling used vinegar to create tartness that mimicked lemon or fruit without requiring expensive citrus or fresh produce. Mothers cooked this in 8 minutes and served it warm in bowls like pudding. This forgotten sweet dish appeared in handwritten recipe cards and community cookbooks throughout the 1930s. Every family ate some version of this when dessert cravings struck, but pantries held nothing but staples. Mothers measured 1 cup of white sugar into a medium saucepan. They whisked in 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour until combined with no lumps remaining. They slowly added 1½ cups of cold water while whisking constantly. They added 3 tablespoons of white vinegar and 2 tablespoons of butter. They added 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract if they had it. They placed the saucepan over medium heat and stirred constantly with a wooden spoon. They cooked the mixture for 6 to 8 minutes while stirring without stopping until it thickened to pudding consistency. They removed it from heat. They poured it into bowls. Some mothers let it cool completely. Some mothers served it warm. Some mothers poured it into a baked pie shell if they had one. Most served it plain in bowls with spoons like pudding. The filling tasted sweet and tangy like lemon custard. The vinegar created authentic sour note that made the sweetness interesting instead of cloying. The butter made it rich and smooth. The texture was thick and creamy. This satisfied dessert cravings completely without requiring oven or expensive ingredients. Mock meatballs became the Depression trick that turned stale bread into protein-like food when meat completely disappeared from budgets. Mothers made these when children cried for meat and nothing remained except bread and basic seasonings. The dish fooled nobody, but provided something chewy and substantial that felt more like meat than actual bread. This forgotten recipe appeared in poverty cookbooks with names like economy balls or bread balls, but families called them mock meatballs and pretended they were real. Every mother who fed children through the Depression knew some version of this desperate recipe. Mothers tore 6 slices of stale bread into small pieces and placed them in a bowl. They poured 1 cup of warm water or milk over the bread and let it soak until completely soft. They squeezed the soaked bread with their hands to remove excess liquid. They added 1 beaten egg to bind everything. They added finely minced onion if they had any. They added salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and any dried herbs available to create savory flavor. They mixed everything together with their hands until it formed cohesive mixture. They shaped the mixture into balls about the size of walnuts. They rolled each ball in flour. They heated oil or lard in a skillet over medium-high heat. They fried the balls 4 to 5 minutes, turning them frequently until all sides turned golden brown and crispy. They drained them on newspaper. They served them with tomato sauce, if they had canned tomatoes, or with gravy made from flour and water. The mock meatballs tasted like savory fried bread. They had no meat flavor whatsoever, but the texture was chewy and substantial. Depression. Donuts became the quick treat mothers made when children begged for something sweet because biscuit dough fried in fat and rolled in sugar created donuts without yeast or rising time. The recipe used basic biscuit ingredients every household kept for daily bread. These quick-fried donuts took 15 minutes total and satisfied sweet cravings that went unmet for weeks. This forgotten recipe appeared in every Depression-era cookbook under various names, but always used the same concept of frying biscuit dough instead of baking it. Mothers mixed 2 cups of flour with 1 tablespoon of baking powder and ½ teaspoon of salt in a bowl. They cut in 3 tablespoons of cold lard or shortening using 2 knives or their fingers until mixture resembled coarse crumbs. They added 3/4 cup of milk and stirred just until dough came together. They turned dough out onto a floured surface and kneaded it gently 3 or 4 times. They rolled dough out ½ inch thick. They cut circles with a drinking glass or biscuit cutter. They used a smaller cutter or thimble to cut holes in the centers to make ring-shaped donuts. They heated 2 inches of oil or lard in a deep skillet or pot to 375 degrees. They carefully dropped dough rings into hot oil 3 or 4 at a time. They fried them 90 seconds per side until golden brown. They removed them with a slotted spoon and drained them on newspaper. They rolled hot donuts in white sugar or cinnamon sugar mixture while still warm. The donuts tasted slightly biscuit-like, but the frying transformed them into something special. The outside turned crispy and golden. The inside stayed soft and tender. The sugar coating added sweetness that made them feel like real treats. Poverty pancakes became the absolute rock-bottom meal that proved families could survive on 3 ingredients, costing almost nothing when eggs, milk, butter, and everything else disappeared. These pancakes used only flour, water, and salt. They contained no eggs for binding, no milk for richness, no sugar for sweetness, no baking powder for rising. They were flat, plain, and adequate. This wasn't a preferred recipe, but rather emergency food when cupboards held literally nothing except these 3 staples. Millions of families ate these during the Depression's worst years and never spoke about them afterward because they represented hunger and desperation nobody wanted to remember. Mothers measured 1 cup of all-purpose flour into a bowl. They added 1/4 teaspoon of salt. They slowly stirred in 3/4 cup of cold water until they had thin batter with no lumps. The batter was thinner than regular pancake batter because no eggs or baking powder existed to create fluff. They heated a skillet or griddle over medium heat and greased it with whatever small amount of fat they had, or nothing at all. They poured small amounts of batter onto the hot surface, making palm-sized pancakes. Tramp's supper became the meal that represented absolute poverty because the name itself admitted this was food for homeless wanderers who had nothing. The dish combined fried potatoes with a tea made from onion skins because even onion skins could be boiled into something hot to drink when nothing else existed. This wasn't a real recipe families proudly shared, but rather something people remembered seeing or hearing about that horrified and fascinated them. The concept appeared in Depression oral histories where elderly people recalled the absolute worst meals that marked rock bottom during the hardest years. Tramps, or extremely poor families, saved onion skins instead of throwing them away. They boiled the papery outer skins in water for 10 minutes to create a weak broth that resembled tea. They strained out the skins and drank the hot liquid plain or with salt if any existed. Meanwhile, they sliced whatever potatoes they had into thin rounds. They fried the potato slices in a tiny amount of fat in a skillet until they softened and browned slightly. They seasoned them with salt if they had any. Sometimes this was all a person ate in an entire day. The potatoes tasted of whatever fat they were fried in. The onion skin tea tasted like extremely weak onion broth with no substance whatsoever. This was food for people who had fallen through every safety net into complete destitution. These meals existed at the margins of society among people who were one step away from starvation. They survived only in oral histories as examples of how bad things got and how people found ways to survive anyway by eating things most people would never consider food. 10 forgotten suppers, from midnight supper to tramp's supper, represented survival eating at every level. Every recipe used what remained. Every dish cost almost nothing. These meals fed America through depression and hard times when hunger was real and creativity meant survival. These suppers kept people alive when nothing else existed. Bread pudding on the skillet became the quick dessert supper that skipped the oven and cooked directly in a covered skillet on the stovetop when gas or electricity bills couldn't be paid and ovens got shut off. Traditional bread pudding baked for an hour, but this version cooked in 15 minutes on the stove. This forgotten cooking method appeared in Depression cookbooks under various names, but always emphasized saving fuel costs. Mothers tore 4 cups of stale bread into chunks and placed them in a bowl. They beat 2 eggs with 1 cup of milk, 1/4 cup of sugar, ½ teaspoon of vanilla extract, and 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. They poured the egg mixture over the bread and let it soak 5 minutes until bread absorbed all the liquid. They melted 2 tablespoons of butter in a large cast-iron skillet over low heat. They spread the soaked bread mixture evenly across the skillet bottom. They covered the skillet tightly with a lid. They cooked it over low heat for 15 minutes without lifting the lid. They checked it by gently shaking the skillet to see if the center had set. They removed it from heat and let it rest 5 minutes. They cut it into wedges like a cake and served it warm. The bread pudding tasted custardy and sweet. The bottom developed slight crust from frying in butter. The top stayed soft and creamy. Cinnamon flavored everything. This represented Depression-era ingenuity that found alternative methods when standard cooking became unaffordable. The secret was low heat and tight lid that trapped steam and created oven-like environment on the stovetop, allowing eggs to set and bread to transform into custard without burning the bottom, making fuel-free baking possible for families who lost gas or electric service during hardest times. Gravy sandwich became the Depression lunch that proved any food between bread counted as a sandwich, even when that food was just flour gravy and nothing else. Mothers made this when leftover meat gravy from dinner existed, or when flour gravy could be made quickly to fill bread and create something more substantial than butter sandwiches. This forgotten sandwich wasn't good, but it was filling and cheap, and provided something between bread slices that resembled actual sandwich filling. Mothers made simple flour gravy by melting 2 tablespoons of butter or lard in a skillet over medium heat. They whisked in 2 tablespoons of flour and cooked it 1 minute to make roux. They slowly added 1 cup of milk or water while whisking constantly until smooth. They cooked the gravy 3 to 4 minutes until it thickened considerably more than normal gravy because it needed to be thick enough to stay inside bread without soaking through. They seasoned it with generous salt and black pepper. They let the thick gravy cool until it was warm, but not hot enough to make bread soggy immediately. They spread the thick gravy between two slices of white bread, like they would spread peanut butter or jam. They pressed the sandwich together firmly. They wrapped it in waxed paper if it was for lunch pails. They served it immediately if it was for supper at home. These sandwiches marked families who were struggling badly. Nobody made these after the Depression unless they were deliberately trying to recreate Depression meals for historical purposes. These disappeared from family recipes because they represented shameful poverty nobody wanted to remember or pass down. The secret was making the gravy extremely thick, so it held together like spread instead of soaking through bread immediately, and wrapping it tightly so it held together long enough to eat at lunchtime, making barely adequate sandwich, possible when nothing else existed to put between bread slices. Cornmeal gruel became the thin porridge sick people and elderly toothless individuals ate when solid food was too difficult to chew or digest. The dish was cornmeal cooked with excessive water until it became thin, drinkable consistency instead of thick mush. Mothers made this for feverish children who needed something in their stomachs. Elderly people ate this when their teeth were gone and regular food became impossible. This wasn't meant to be delicious, but rather easy to swallow and digest while providing some calories and warmth. The forgotten dish represented caretaking and illness and old age in times when soft food options were limited. Mothers or caregivers boiled 3 cups of water in a saucepan over medium heat. They whisked in half cup of yellow cornmeal very slowly while stirring constantly to prevent lumps from forming. They reduced heat to low and continued cooking while stirring frequently for 10 to 15 minutes until the mixture was completely smooth and thin enough to drink like thick soup. They added pinch of salt. They ladled the hot gruel into bowls. They placed 1 tablespoon of butter on top of each bowl so it melted into creamy pools. They let it cool until it was warm enough to eat without burning mouths. Sick people ate this with spoons, or sometimes drank it from cups when they were too weak to use spoons. Elderly people ate bowls of this multiple times daily when solid food became impossible. This wasn't poverty food exactly, but rather sick food and old age food. The secret was cooking the cornmeal long enough that it became completely smooth and stirring constantly to prevent lumps and making it thin enough to swallow easily, making basic nutrition possible for people who couldn't handle regular food anymore. Prune whip became the quick supper elderly people made when living alone because prunes provided necessary fiber and mashed easily for toothless mouths. The dish was simply stewed prunes mashed and spread on toast like jam. This forgotten dish appeared in cookbooks for invalids and elderly care from the 1920s through the 1960s as recommended easy-to-eat, nutritious food for aging Americans living alone or in care facilities. Elderly cooks or their caregivers placed 1 cup of dried prunes in a small saucepan with 1 cup of water. They brought it to a boil, then reduced heat and simmered 15 minutes until prunes were very soft. They drained excess liquid. They mashed the soft prunes with a fork until they formed smooth paste. They added 1 tablespoon of sugar and tiny pinch of cinnamon and mixed everything together. They toasted 2 slices of white bread until golden brown. They spread the warm prune paste thickly on the toast like they would spread jam or butter. They cut the toast into triangles or strips. Some people ate this for breakfast. Some ate it for supper. Some ate it as snack throughout the day. Some caregivers added a beaten egg white to the mashed prunes and folded it in to make actual whipped consistency, which was closer to the proper whip name. Some people ate this for breakfast. Some ate it for supper. Some ate it as snack throughout the day. Some caregivers added a beaten egg white to the mashed prunes and folded it in to make actual whipped consistency, which was closer to the proper whip name. The prune paste tasted sweet and slightly tangy. The consistency was similar to thick jam. Toast provided crunch that contrasted with smooth prune texture. This provided necessary fiber that elderly people needed for digestion. Prunes were recommended by doctors for constipation, which was a common problem for aging people with slowed digestive systems. This was medicinal food that happened to be somewhat tasty. Elderly people ate this regularly out of necessity rather than preference. This represented the intersection of nutrition and aging, where food became medicine and eating became strategy for maintaining health rather than pleasure. Young people never understood why grandparents ate prunes regularly until they aged themselves and discovered the same digestive issues their grandparents faced. This dish connected generations through the universal experience of aging bodies requiring specific foods to function properly. The secret was cooking prunes until they were soft enough to mash completely smooth, making them easy to swallow and digest while providing concentrated nutrition and fiber that elderly digestive systems required even when chewing and eating regular meals. End-of-the-week hash became the Friday night supper that used every leftover from the previous 6 days before Saturday. Shopping refilled the icebox. Mothers combined all remaining food into one skillet and called it hash. No two batches tasted the same because ingredients varied completely depending on what remained. This wasn't a real recipe with measurements, but rather a concept and necessity. Every family ate some version of this weekly when payday approached and food supplies dwindled to nothing but odds and ends that needed using before they spoiled. Mothers looked through the icebox and cupboards Friday evening and gathered every scrap of leftover food. Leftover mashed potatoes went into a bowl. Leftover cooked vegetables went in. Leftover meat, if any existed, went in. Leftover rice or noodles went in. Stale bread torn into pieces went in. Everything edible that remained got added to the bowl. Mothers heated 2 tablespoons of fat in a large cast-iron skillet over medium heat. They dumped the entire bowl of mixed leftovers into the hot skillet. They pressed everything flat with a spatula. They let it cook without stirring for 5 to 6 minutes until the bottom formed crispy brown crust. They flipped sections and cooked the other side until crispy. They seasoned everything with salt and pepper and whatever spices remained. They served it hot from the skillet with forks. Some mothers cracked eggs on top during the last few minutes. Some mothers added ketchup or hot sauce on top for flavor. Most served it plain and called it good enough for Friday night. The hash tasted different every week. Sometimes it was mostly potatoes. Sometimes it was mostly vegetables. Sometimes meat made it substantial. Sometimes nothing but bread and gravy held it together. The crispy bottom made everything taste better regardless of what ingredients went into it. Families understood this meal represented the end of the week when supplies ran out and payday couldn't come fast enough. Children complained less than expected because Friday night hash was tradition and familiarity. Mothers felt satisfied getting every scrap used before it spoiled, making waste impossible when poverty meant nothing could be thrown away. Savory oatmeal became the confusion supper that shocked modern families because Americans today think of oatmeal as exclusively sweet breakfast food, but Depression families ate savory oatmeal for supper regularly when nothing else existed. The concept of salty, buttery oatmeal instead of sweet oatmeal with sugar and fruit seemed wrong to people raised after the 1960s. But throughout human history, oats were cooked as savory porridge more often than sweet. Scottish and Irish immigrants knew this well. Depression families rediscovered savory oatmeal when meat and vegetables disappeared, but oats remained cheap and filling. Mothers boiled 2 cups of water with generous pinch of salt in a saucepan over medium-high heat. They stirred in 1 cup of old-fashioned rolled oats. They reduced heat to medium-low and cooked the oats 5 minutes while stirring occasionally until they absorbed water and became thick, creamy porridge. They removed the pot from heat. They stirred in 2 tablespoons of butter that melted into the hot oats. They added more salt and generous black pepper. They ladled the savory oatmeal into bowls. Some mothers topped it with fried egg. Some mothers added chopped onions or garlic while cooking the oats. Some mothers stirred in grated cheese. Some mothers added leftover cooked vegetables. Most served it plain with just butter, salt, and pepper, because even these simple additions cost money they didn't have. The oatmeal tasted creamy and savory. The butter made it rich. Salt and pepper gave it flavor that satisfied without sweetness. This filled bellies completely and stuck to ribs for hours. All the texture was thick and substantial. Families ate this for supper and felt adequately fed despite no meat or vegetables in the meal. Children initially resisted because they expected sweet oatmeal, but accepted savory oatmeal after a few meals when hunger overcame preferences. Adults recognized this as porridge, which humans had eaten for thousands of years before sugar became cheap enough to add routinely. This represented return to basics and eating for survival rather than pleasure. Savory oatmeal proved food didn't need to be fancy or traditional or expected to be adequate nutrition. This simple hot porridge kept families fed when options narrowed to almost nothing. The meal cost less than 10 cents and provided whole grain nutrition that sustained energy better than white bread and sugar. The secret was generous amounts of butter and salt that transformed plain oats into satisfying savory meal rather than bland punishment, making breakfast food acceptable for supper when poverty required eating whatever was cheapest and most filling, regardless of whether it seemed like dinner food. Molasses bread soak became the quick sweet supper that used 2 ingredients depression families always kept because molasses cost less than sugar and stale bread was free. The dish combined leftover bread with molasses syrup to create something sweet that satisfied dessert cravings when no money existed for actual desserts. This forgotten meal appeared across the rural South and Appalachia, where molasses was dietary staple and sugar was expensive luxury. Children ate this for supper when nothing else remained. Elderly people ate this when chewing became difficult. Everyone recognized this as poverty food that marked families at the bottom. Mothers or children themselves tore stale bread into chunks and placed them in bowls. They heated half cup of dark molasses with quarter cup of water in a small saucepan over low heat, stirring until it thinned into pourable syrup consistency. They poured the hot molasses syrup over the bread chunks in each bowl. They let it soak 2 to 3 minutes until bread softened and absorbed the molasses. They handed bowls and spoons to children. Some families added butter to the hot molasses, if any existed. Some families used sorghum syrup instead of molasses, which tasted slightly different but served the same purpose. Some families soaked bread in cold molasses without heating it. Most used hot molasses because it soaked into bread faster and felt more like real food than cold, sticky bread. The bread tasted intensely sweet and slightly bitter from molasses. The texture was soft and mushy. The molasses provided iron and minerals that white sugar didn't contain, making this accidentally nutritious despite being poverty food. This satisfied sweet cravings immediately. Children ate this and felt like they got dessert, even though adults knew this was desperation meal. The combination filled bellies with cheap calories when protein and vegetables were completely unaffordable. This wasn't delicious, but it was edible and sweet, which mattered when life offered few pleasures. Families ate this without shame among themselves, but never mentioned it to outsiders, because molasses bread marked them as desperately poor. This meal represented the southern poverty that northern urban poverty never quite understood, because molasses was regional ingredient that didn't appear in northern tenement cooking the same way. The secret was using dark molasses instead of light molasses that provided stronger flavor and more minerals, making this meal slightly more nutritious than it appeared, and heating the molasses so it poured easily and soaked into bread faster, creating acceptable texture quickly. Fried hash, brown potato cakes became the all-day food because one batch made at breakfast got eaten at 3 meals throughout the day. Mothers grated potatoes early morning and fried them into individual cakes that served as breakfast, got packed into lunch pails, and reappeared at supper reheated or eaten cold. This extended breakfast food into complete daily nutrition. One batch of hash brown cakes cost 20 cents and fed a family of 4 across 3 meals. This forgotten practice represented making food last when money was too tight to make separate dishes for each meal. Mothers woke early and peeled 4 large potatoes. They grated potatoes on a box grater into shreds. They squeezed grated potatoes hard in a clean kitchen towel to remove as much water as possible. They placed squeezed potato shreds in a bowl. They added 1 beaten egg to bind everything together. They added half a small onion grated. They added salt and black pepper generously. They mixed everything with their hands until combined. They heated 1/4 inch of oil or lard in a large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. They formed potato mixture into palm-sized flat cakes. They carefully placed cakes in hot oil. They fried them 4 minutes per side until golden brown and crispy. They drained them on newspaper. They served some immediately for breakfast. They wrapped some for lunch pails. They saved some for supper. Some mothers made them spicier for adults. Some mothers kept them plain for children. Most made one batch one way and ate it 3 times because making separate meals was impossible. The potato cakes tasted crispy outside and tender inside. The edges turned extra brown and crunchy. These were delicious hot at breakfast. They were adequate cold at lunch. They were good reheated for supper or eaten cold if no fuel remained for reheating. Families ate these 3 meals daily and didn't complain because potatoes were filling and affordable. The cakes held together well enough to pack in lunch pails without falling apart. Children traded these at school because they were good enough to have value. Workers ate these on job sites because they traveled well. These represented practical cooking that maximized labor and ingredients by cooking once and eating 3 times, making poverty food efficient rather than just cheap. The secret was squeezing out maximum water and adding egg that created cakes that held together perfectly and reheated well, making once daily cooking sufficient for 3 meals throughout the day. Quick rice and canned tomato skillet became the 15-minute supper that combined 2 pantry staples into something that resembled Spanish rice without requiring meat or fresh vegetables. Mothers made this when absolutely nothing fresh existed but canned goods, and dried rice sat in the cupboard. The dish provided carbohydrates and some vitamins from tomatoes. This wasn't exciting food, but it was hot and filling and required almost no skill or time. Every family ate some version of this when grocery money ran out before payday and creativity stretched remaining ingredients into adequate meals. Mothers heated 2 tablespoons of butter or oil in a large skillet over medium heat. They added 1 cup of long-grain white rice and stirred it in the fat for 2 minutes until it toasted slightly and smelled nutty. They opened 1 large can of diced tomatoes and poured the entire contents, including juice, into the skillet with the rice. They added 1 cup of water. They added salt, black pepper, and whatever dried herbs they had like oregano or thyme. They stirred everything together and brought it to a boil. They reduced heat to low and covered the skillet with a tight-fitting lid. They cooked it 15 minutes without lifting the lid or stirring. They removed it from heat and let it rest 5 minutes still covered. They fluffed it with a fork and served it hot. The rice absorbed all the tomato juice and turned soft and slightly pink. The tomatoes broke down into the rice, creating cohesive dish rather than rice with tomatoes on top. This tasted mildly Italian or Spanish, depending on what seasonings got added. Families ate this as main dish when nothing else existed. Some mothers added canned peas or corn if they had them. Some mothers added hot pepper flakes for heat. Most served it plain because additions cost money they didn't have. This filled bellies adequately and provided complete starchy meal that sustained energy through evening. Children ate this without much complaining because the tomato flavor made it interesting enough to be acceptable. This represented pantry cooking that required no fresh ingredients and no advanced planning, making it perfect for families who couldn't afford to keep fresh food on hand or shop more than once weekly or monthly. Then the secret was not lifting the lid during cooking that trapped steam and cooked rice perfectly, while allowing tomato flavor to penetrate every grain, making simple combination taste like actual recipe rather than desperation meal. Lentil and chickpea. Quick soup became the modern Depression meal because dried lentils and canned chickpeas combined into protein-complete soup in 10 minutes, using ingredients that stored indefinitely. This wasn't a 1930s recipe exactly, but rather represents the continuing tradition of poor people making nutritious meals from shelf-stable ingredients. Immigrant families from Mediterranean and Middle Eastern backgrounds knew this meal for generations. American families discovered it during the Depression and then again during modern poverty, when wages stagnated, but rent increased, making food insecurity return to millions of households. Modern poor cooks, or Depression-era immigrant families, opened 1 can of chickpeas and drained the liquid. They rinsed chickpeas under cold water. They measured 1 cup of red lentils, which cooked faster than other lentil varieties. They brought 4 cups of water or cheap vegetable broth to boil in a large pot over high heat. They added lentils and chickpeas to the boiling liquid. They reduced heat to medium and cooked 10 minutes until lentils became completely soft and started breaking down into the broth. They added salt, black pepper, cumin, and garlic powder to taste. They stirred in a handful of spinach or frozen greens if they had any. They ladled soup into bowls. Some families added lemon juice if available. Some families added hot sauce for heat. Some families topped it with plain yogurt if any existed. Most ate it plain with bread for dipping because additions cost extra. The soup tasted earthy and savory. Lentils broke down and thickened the broth naturally. Chickpeas added texture and substance. This provided complete protein without meat or dairy, because combining legumes and grains created all essential amino acids bodies needed. This filled bellies completely and provided excellent nutrition despite costing under $2 for an entire pot that fed 4 people. Modern poor families made this when food stamps ran out before month ended. College students made this when loan money disappeared. And single parents made this when paychecks stretched impossibly thin across rent and utilities, leaving almost nothing for food. This represented timeless poverty cooking that transcended specific decades or economic crises because hunger and limited money created same solutions across generations and cultures. This soup proved good nutrition was possible even in poverty if knowledge existed about protein complementing and quick cooking legumes. The secret was using red lentils that cooked in 10 minutes, unlike other varieties, making quick, nutritious poverty meal possible without planning ahead or soaking anything overnight.